Officer Marcus Johnson had been on patrol for almost 5 years. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a strong sense of justice. Marcus was proud of his role in the community. His reputation as a fair and approachable cop had earned him respect from almost everyone he met. But not everyone valued respect, and not everyone saw Marcus for the dedicated officer he was. On this particular day, Marcus had just finished a routine call when his radio went off with an alert about a woman who had been driving recklessly. A few streets over, he almost ran a cyclist off the road. When he checked the coordinates, he saw that the location wasn't too far from his current patrol area, so he started his cruiser and got ready to look into it. At the same time, Karen Williams was fuming in her white SUV. She was known for having an inflated ego, and she often had a sharp word for anyone she thought was in her way. Today was no different. She had been stuck behind a slow driver for almost 10 minutes and was now taking her time. Out on the road, Karen's anger grew with each passing second. She thought the rules didn't apply to her, and who the heck was the police to tell her what to do? Her mind was filled with righteous anger, and she had no idea what she was about to set off. Marcus turned the corner onto Pinewood Avenue and looked ahead. Just as he reached the intersection, he saw the white SUV was speeding down the road at an unsafe rate. Marcus calmly turned on his lights and pulled out behind the SUV, planning to pull the driver over for a routine stop. Inside the SUV, Karen saw the flashing lights in her rearview mirror and her blood started to boil. "Oh great," she muttered, her voice full of disdain for another cop who had nothing better to do. As she looked again at the cruiser behind her, she caught a glimpse of Marcus, the black man. She cursed under her breath, her already high temper skyrocketing at the sight of him. He sparked a dangerous spark inside her and fed her deep-seated hatred for anyone who didn't look like her. Marcus, unaware of Karen's rage, pulled up behind her, parked, and got out of the cruiser. He then carefully made his way to the driver's side of her car. Years of experience had taught him to be careful in every situation, but there was something about. As he got closer to Karen's window, he saw her glaring at him through her big sunglasses. Her face was twisted into a mask of disdain, and Karen rolled down her window halfway. Her posture was stiff and uncooperative, and she wouldn't answer. Instead, she stared at him with her lips curled in a sneer, asking, "Ma'am, I need you to hand over your license and registration, please." Marcus stayed calm, but he could feel the tension rising. "I saw you speeding down Pinewood Avenue. It's a 25 miles per hour zone and you were well over that. I just need you to pull me over for that." Karen pat her off, escalating the situation. "That's ridiculous. I wasn't speeding, and I don't have time for this nonsense. You people are always trying to find something to criticize." Marcus raised an eyebrow without showing his face, but he knew that He knew things wouldn't go as smoothly as he had hoped because he had dealt with difficult drivers before, but something about her tone and the way she said "you people" made his stomach tighten. He kept his cool, though, saying, "Ma'am, I just need your, I'm not giving you anything." Karen's voice almost screamed, her face red with anger. "I don't have to listen to you for a moment." Marius knew that making things worse would only make things worse, so he took a step back and told her, "Ma'am, it's important that we follow. Protocol here says that if you cooperate, this will only take a few minutes," but Karen wasn't interested in calming down. Her sense of entitlement had reached a fever pitch, and seeing Marcus, the black police officer, standing there asking her for something was too much for her ego. She had no intention of following his orders. In an instant, Karen slammed her foot on the gas, sending the SUV lurching forward with tires screeching. Marcus barely had time to react. His instincts kicked in, and he jumped back to avoid being hit, leaving Marcus with no time to react. Sped away from the scene of the crime, Marcus stumbled a little but stayed on his feet. His heart was racing from the close call, but his training kicked in, and he rushed back to his cruiser, hands steady as he grabbed the radio and reported the incident as an officer-downed suspect fleeing the scene. He barked into the mic, his eyes narrowing as he watched Karen's SUV speed away. Little did Karen know that her actions had already set off a chain of events that would get out of hand. As Marcus sped after the SUV, the shriek of Karen's tires could still be heard in Marcus's ears. His heart was racing, and adrenaline was rushing through his veins. He had been in a few chases before, but something about this one felt different. Karen's erratic behavior and open hostility made him think this wasn't just another routine stop and frisk. Up ahead, Karen weaved through traffic, barely missing a sedan as she ran through a stop sign, her hands on the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She didn't care about the possible dangers she was causing. All she wanted to do was get away from the officer who had dared to stop her. As Marcus closed the distance between them, his eyes locked on her license plate. He quickly called dispatch and said, "This is Officer Johnson. The suspect's vehicle is a white SUV with license plate number 6TJ724, speeding through Pinewood Avenue, requesting immediate backup." His voice was calm, but his mind was racing. He could have let her get away, so he kept a safe distance and watched as Karen swerved recklessly, cutting off other drivers and ignoring red lights. People on the sidewalk stopped and stepped back in shock as her SUV sped down the road. In the back of Marcus's mind, he couldn't help but wonder what had made her so crazy. Was it his uniform or the color of his skin, or was it something deeper, a dangerous mix of arrogance and prejudice, that had driven her to such a crazy level of behavior? Whatever it was, she was putting lives at risk. Veered onto the highway and sped up as she joined the traffic. Marcus scanned the road for an opening. He could feel the weight of his badge as he focused, knowing that this wasn't just about him and Karen. This chase was getting dangerous very quickly. Karen looked in her rearview mirror and sneered when she saw Marcus still in pursuit. What does he think he's going to do? She asked herself, her voice shaking with anger. He can't touch me for years. She had lived her life above the rules, breaking speed limits, cutting in line at the grocery store, and treating people badly because she thought her status and wealth protected her from consequences. Today she was determined to prove it. The fact that it was a black officer chasing her only made her feel better about herself. As she pressed harder on the gas pedal, the SUV lurched forward, weaving dangerously between cars as drivers swerved to avoid her. Marcus stayed right behind his eyes. Focusing on the road ahead, Karen saw an exit ramp and swerved at the last second, cutting off the delivery truck as she swerved onto the narrow side street. Marcus followed closely, but the side street was full of parked cars and narrow lanes, making it harder for him to maneuver his cruiser. He radioed for help again, this time with a steady voice that said, "Suspect has taken an exit ramp onto Oak Street while still being pursued. Traffic is heavy, and she's driving recklessly. I need backup at my location." ASAP, Karen's SUV hit a speed bump, and as she made a sharp turn, she almost hit a parked car. She was struggling to keep control of the vehicle, and sweat ran down her face. She wasn't slowing down, though. She was sure she could outrun Marcus in the cruiser, and he couldn't keep chasing her through these residential streets for much longer because there was too much of a chance that someone would get hurt. But Karen wasn't slowing down, and every turn she took seemed more careless than the last. As Marcus got closer to another intersection, he saw a school crossing sign up ahead. His heart skipped a beat. Karen was about to start the school year, and as she kept driving like this, she could crash through the neighborhood where kids were walking home. Without thinking, Marcus grabbed his radio again. His voice was sharp and urgent. "This is Officer Johnson. We're approaching a school zone." "I repeat, we're approaching a school zone. Suspect is not slowing down." But Karen didn't know. Her tunnel vision kept her eyes only on the road ahead. With a twisted sense of victory, she was going to get away. She had always gotten what she wanted, and today would be no different. She stepped on the gas even more, sending her SUV flying past the speed limit signs without giving it a second thought. Suddenly, Marcus saw his chance. There was a sharp curve in the road that led to a small cul-de-sac. If he could box her in, she wouldn't be able to get out, so he waited for the right moment. Karen hit the curve too quickly, and her SUV skittered as the wheels lost their grip. When the SUV lost control, Marcus could see her panic in the rearview mirror. She was jerking the wheel to try to regain control, but it was too late. With a sickening crunch, the SUV hit a parked car, throwing Karen forward as the airbags went off. Marcus skidded to a stop a few feet away, and with his heart racing, he jumped out of his cruiser and ran toward the accident, where Karen was slumped over the wheel, confused. She was disoriented, her sunglasses said "Jour," and her face was burned from the airbags. She moaned and tried to come to her senses as Marcus approached the door. "Ma'am, stay where you are," he said in a calm but firm voice. "Help is on the way." But Karen didn't give up. Instead, her eyes snapped open, and she yanked the door open and stumbled out onto the street, screaming, "You're not going to take me in." Karen stumbled out of her SUV, still lost, but clearly high on adrenaline. Her expensive clothes were wrinkly, and her face was red with anger. She didn't care that she had damaged her car, put other people in danger, or even just caused a crack. All that mattered to her was getting away. Marcus charged toward her, his training showing as he prepared to arrest her, but before he could reach out, Karen stumbled backward, her eyes wide with defiance. "You don't get to touch me," she yelled. Screamed, her voice cracking with anger, "You don't get to tell me what to do." Marcus raised his hands to try to calm things down. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down," even though he could feel his patience wearing thin and his body was still buzzing from the intense chase. He had to keep his cool because he had seen people with this kind of attitude before, people who thought they were above the law and their privilege would protect them from any consequences. But Karen was different. Her anger was irrational, almost wild. Karen was out of control, her mind filled with a dangerous mix of entitlement and anger. She took another step back, her eyes darting around as if looking for an escape route. "Ma'am Marcus," he said, "keep your voice down. You're not going anywhere." But Karen wasn't listening. With a sudden burst of speed, she turned and ran down the sidewalk, her designer shoes slapping against the ground as she ran. Marcus cursed under his breath and ran after her. The street was narrow and lined with houses, leaving no room for. She tried to hide, but she was faster than Marcus thought she would be, and her erratic movements made it hard for him to close the distance. As she ran past a group of shocked onlookers, Marcus yelled, "Get out of the way." The shocked onlookers ran away, watching as the chase barreled through their quiet neighborhood. Marcus's lungs hurt, but he kept up his pace, determined not to lose Karen. Karen's blonde hair flew in the wind as she turned a corner and disappeared into a small alleyway. Marcus followed his feet, pounding the ground. As he ran after her, the alley was crowded with dumpsters and trash cans, making the narrow path difficult to navigate. Karen tripped over a stack of boxes as she ran, hoping to slow Marcus down, but he easily jumped over them. His focus was so sharp that he could hear Karen's labored breathing and the sound of her shoe hitting the ground as she sprinted to stay ahead. Suddenly, the alley opened up into a small parking lot behind a row of rundown stores. Out of breath and with no other choice, Karen stopped and looked around. There was nowhere else to go because the lot was fenced in on 3 sides and the only way out was the way she had come, but she wasn't ready to give up. She spun around, eyes wild and desperate as Marcus closed in on her. Marcus barked, his voice booming through the empty lot. He was only a few feet away, and Karen's defiance was giving way to panic. Instead of giving up, she screamed, "You think you can take me down? You don't know who I am." She said, "I'll take your badge and ruin you." But Marcus wasn't scared because he had heard all of these empty threats of revenge and desperate claims of power before. This wasn't about status or power anymore. It was about safety, the safety of everyone Karen had put at risk with her careless behavior. Marcus reached for his radio again to let others know where he was, but just as he did, Karen made one last desperate move. She turned on her heel and ran toward an older model car that was parked in the lot. Marcus's heart jumped into his throat as he yelled, "Stop!" His voice cracked with urgency. He could see what she was trying to do, and knew he had to act quickly. He rushed forward to close the gap between them, but Karen was already pulling open the car door, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys that she had left inside. With a grunt of effort, Marcus lunged at her and grabbed her arm just as she swung into the driver's seat. Karen screamed in frustration and began thrashing around wildly. She screamed in anger as she tried to shake him off, her nails clawing at his arm. Marcus held firm, pulling her out of the car and pinning her to the ground. "Let me go," she yelled, her voice muffled by the asphalt under her feet. She kicked out wildly, her body riding under his grip, but Marcus wouldn't give up. He reached for his handcuffs and tightened them around her wrists with practiced precision. "You're under arrest," he said in a low, steady voice as he finished cuffing her for resisting arrest, fleeing the scene of a crime, and endangerment. Karen screamed again, her face twisted in shock. "You can't do this to me. I'll sue you and lose my job." But Marcus wasn't listening. The weight of the chase and the danger she had put so many people in was heavy on his mind. His radio rang, and the voices of his fellow officers confirmed that help was on the way. As he sat back and caught his breath, Marcus looked down at Karen. Her defiance had faded, and she had replaced it with a hollow, almost pitiful look, but Mark didn't feel sorry for her. Karen would have to face the consequences of her actions for once when suddenly a wail of sirens filled the air, getting louder with each second. Karen lay on the ground with her face pressed against the pavement, but her pride hadn't got away. She still thought that she could talk her way out of this, and that her wealth and status would protect her from the fallout. Marcus knew better. Today was different. She had crossed a line that not even her privilege could erase, and Marcus knew that this wasn't over yet. Karen was sitting in the back of the police cruiser, with her hands cuffed behind her back. Her face was red with anger, and she glared out the window, her breathing fast as she tried to come to terms with what was happening. As more officers arrived, sirens wailed around her, and their flashing lights cast an eerie glow on the otherwise quiet parking lot. But Karen was still sure that this was all a mistake and that her nightmare would soon be over. Officers swarmed the scene, taking statements from witnesses, cordoning off the area, and inspecting the damage Carmen had caused. A few of the other officers gave Marcus a nod of respect, recognizing the work he had done to stop her, but Marcus barely acknowledged them. His mind was still racing, and his adrenaline was still pumping from the chase. He looked over at Karen, who was now yelling at one of the officers from the back seat of the cruiser. "This is Karen. You're all going to regret this, and I'll have you all fired," he said, shaking his head. She still didn't get it. He had seen people who thought they were above the law and that the rules didn't apply to them, but Karen had gone too far this time. The damage was done, and she wasn't going to leave while the other officers worked. Marcus' partner, Officer Jenkins, walked up to him and clapped him on the shoulder. "Are you all right?" Jenkins asked. Jenkins shook his head in disbelief. "Yeah, she's something else all right. I've seen plenty of Karens in my time, but this one takes the cake," he said. The two officers looked at each other with the weight of the situation hanging heavy between them. Jenkins had been on the force longer than Marcus, and his experience showed in his calm demeanor, but even he seemed shaken by how careless Karen had been. "She almost got away," Marcus said. Jenkins told Marcus, "You bought her, and that's what matters. She's not going anywhere now." Marcus nodded, but the tension in his chest stayed. He couldn't get rid of the feeling that this wasn't over, and that Karen's pride would make her do something even more reckless. He had seen people like Karen before, people who thought they could get around the system, and people who thought their money or status would protect them from the consequences of their actions. But this time, Marcus wasn't so sure. The mess she made and the danger she caused weren't too big, but he had a feeling that Karen wasn't done fighting by any means. As the police finished their work, Marcus took a deep breath and calmed down. The immediate threat was gone, but the situation still felt unstable. He knew Karen would be arrested and processed, and eventually the court would take over, but for now he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't going to be as easy as it seemed. "Let's get her out of here." Karen's voice rose again as the officer opened the door and pulled her out of the back seat. She kicked and struggled, but the officer held firm and dragged her toward the station's transport van. "I want to talk to your supervisor. You can't treat me like this. I'll sue all of you," she said. Marcus clenched his jaw, resisting the urge to respond. He had dealt with difficult people before, but Karen was pushing all of his buttons. She was adamant in her entitlement. Marcus wasn't going to let her get on his nerves. He had a job to do, and no amount of yelling or threats would stop him. As Karen was being loaded into the van, Marcus turned to Jenkins and said, "Let's head back to the station." His voice was heady with exhaustion. "There's still a ton of paperwork to fill out on this." Jenkins agreed and gave a small laugh. "Yeah, this one's going to be a headache for sure, but we'll get through it." The two officers made their way back to the station. As they drove back to the station, Marcus stared out the window, his mind racing with everything that had happened. He couldn't get rid of the feeling that Karen wasn't done making trouble. Even in jail, she would find a way to cause trouble. The ride back to the station was quiet. The day's events were still weighing heavily on the air. The city streets seemed calm after the chaos in the cave the previous few hours, but Marcus knew better than to let his guard down. When Marcus and Jenkins walked into the station, their footsteps echoed through the empty halls. The station was mostly quiet, with only the hum of distant conversations and the occasional rustling of papers, but the silence felt deceptive. It was the calm before the storm. As Marcus sat down at his desk to start the mountain of work that awaited him, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and read the message from his friend Jenkins. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. Something wasn't right. He looked at Jenkins, who had also gotten the message and was already standing with a serious face. The two officers walked to the captain's office, building tension with each step. When they got there, Captain Reynolds was waiting for them, his face pale and drawn. "We've got a situation," he said in a low voice, and Marcus got a chill down his spine. He thought this had something to do with Karen and whatever it wasn't good. Marcus followed Captain Reynolds into his office, feeling tense because he couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they were about to talk about had something to do with Karen. The room was tense, and even Jenkins, who was usually calm, looked tense. "Take a seat," Captain Reynolds said, pointing to the chairs in front of his desk. His tone was serious, which made Marcus feel even worse. Marcus sat down, looked at Jenkins, and then looked at the captain. "What's going on?" Captain Reynolds leaned back in his chair and said, "We have a problem. That woman you just arrested, Karen Albright, turns out to be more than just a troublemaker. Her husband is a famous lawyer named Jonathan Albright." Marcus tensed up when he heard the name. Jonathan Albright was famous in the legal world for his cunning and powerful connections. He could sway a jury with the flick of his wrist and got his clients out of tough situations, no matter how guilty they were. This was even worse than Marcus had imagined. Reynolds continued, Karen is saying that her arrest was racially motivated. Marcus's blood started to boil. Racially motivated, he repeated, shocked. She hit me with her car. How was that racially motivated? J. Lincoln crossed his arms, his face hardening. This is ridiculous. She was resisting arrest, evading police, and hitting Marcus. She put lives at risk. How is this suddenly about race? Reynolds held up his hand to calm them down. I know, I believe you. We all know what happened, and there were witnesses who supported it, but the Albrights are playing a different game. Jonathan is already spreading this story in the media, saying that Karen was targeted because she is white and that the police were out to make an example of her. They are also making accusations of police misconduct. Marcus couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. Karen had shown no remorse, put people in danger, and almost killed him, and now she was trying to turn the tables. What should we do about this? Marcus asked, his voice tight with anger. Reynolds sighed again, frustrated. The department is under a lot of pressure, and the mayor's office has been getting calls from people who want this to go away quietly. Marcus repeated, his anger rising to the surface. She hit a police officer. You can't just let her walk away from that. Reynolds leaned forward, his face grim. I'm not saying she's getting away with it, but we have to be careful with how we handle this. Albright's pulling strings, and he's not going to back down easily. Marcus sat back, his fists clenched. Had dealt with tough cases before, but this one felt different. Karen was dangerous, and now her husband was lying to hide her. The system was supposed to protect the innocent, but sometimes it felt like it tipped in favor of those who knew how to abuse it. What do we do now? Jenkins asked, breaking the tense silence. We've got to be smart. We've got to stick to the facts. Make sure everything is done by the book. I need both of you to keep your cool. Marcus agreed, even though he was still angry. He knew he should be careful, but he felt like Karen was using the situation to her own benefit. The captain looked at Marcus and said, I know this is hard, especially after what she did to you, but we can't give them any more ammunition. If we play this right, the truth will come out and she'll have to face the consequences. Marcus let out a sigh of relief. Okay, I'll do what I need to do, but... Reynolds gave a small nod and said, I think you just stay sharp. As Marcus and Jenkins left the office, the situation became heavier on Marcus's shoulders. He knew Karen wasn't done making trouble. People like her always found a way to avoid responsibility, but he wasn't going to let her get away with it this time. Later that night, Marcus sat in his living room and stared blankly at the news on TV. He had thought the day couldn't get worse, but the report covering the headline on the TV showed, White woman claims police brutality after traffic stop lawyer husband bows justice. Marcus shook his head in shock, thinking Karen had changed the story. The footage showing only bits and pieces of the arrest, without any of the background, made her look like the victim, a poor, helpless woman being harassed by the police. Marcus could feel his stomach turning acidic, and his phone buzzed next to him. It was Jenkins, asking, Have you seen the news? Jenkins quickly typed back, Yeah, unbelievable. We knew it was coming, but it still irritated Marcus, who put his hand over his face and felt bad about what was happening. The media circus surrounding Karen's arrest was only going to get bigger, and people would take sides. When public opinion got involved, things could get ugly quickly. But what really annoyed Marcus was that Karen was dangerous. She had shown that by hitting him with her car and running away, but now she was acting like the victim. He wasn't sure how much more he could handle her lies. The next day, Marcus got to the station early and was ready to get to work, but as soon as he walked in, he could feel the tension. Other officers were whispering to each other, some giving him nods of support, while others kept their distance. The whole department was on edge, because they knew the attention was now on them. As he made his way to his desk, Captain Reynolds called out from across the room. "Marcus, I need you back in my office because we have more news." Marcus's stomach dropped. He didn't know what it was, but something told him Karen wasn't done yet. Marcus took a deep breath as he walked back into Captain Reynolds' office. The situation was getting heavier by the minute. He hadn't had time to process what was going on, and now there was more news. He knew this case wasn't going to be easy, but the way Karen and her husband were spinning the story felt like a whirlwind. It was hard to keep up. When Marcus walked into the office, Reynolds was standing by the window, staring outside as if he were lost in thought. When Marcus walked in, Reynolds turned around, his face stern, but he was still tired. "Close the door, Marcus," he said quietly. Marcus did as he was told, pulling the door shut behind him before taking a seat. He waited and carefully watched the captain. Something was definitely wrong. Reynolds raised his voice and said, "He's called for an internal investigation." Marcus repeated, feeling his heart race. "On what grounds? I didn't do anything wrong. This was just a normal traffic stop until Karen made things worse." Reynolds nodded and said, "I know that, and so do most of you here. But Eyebright was making up a story that the police used too much force and that you specifically targeted his wife." Marcus leaned forward, angry. "She ran me over, Captain. I didn't target anyone. She broke the law and resisted arrest." "She's the one who made this dangerous," Reynolds said. "You're dealing with someone who knows how to game the system. He's called in favors, and now the department is being closely watched by the IA, who are going to look at everything from the body cam footage to witness statements. They're even going through past cases to see if there's any pattern they can use against you." Marcus felt sick at the thought of someone going through his past to find something they could twist to fit Karen's story. He had always taken pride in being fair and just at work, but this made him sick. Marcus asked with a tight voice, "What am I supposed to do? I can't sit back and let them tear me apart for doing my job." Reynolds leaned forward and kept his eyes on him. "Cal, you need to stay calm. The truth is on your side. We have the video, the witnesses, and a report. As long as you stick to the facts, you'll be fine. But you can't let this get to you. Eyebright is hoping to rattle you, hoping you'll make a mistake. Don't give him that satisfaction." Marcus clenched his jaw, his anger building just below the surface. On the surface, he knew the captain was right, but that didn't make things any easier for SW to swallow. "What about Karen?" he asked. "Is she really going to be punished for what she did?" Reynolds looked grim. "She's been released on bail, her husband pulled some strings, and now she's back home. She's probably sitting in her living room, sipping wine, while we're here cleaning up the mess she made. Karen had put lives in danger and assaulted a police officer. She lied to the police officer and then ran away, but she was treated like a victim. It was sickening to see how powerful and privileged people like her could change the rules to suit themselves." "This isn't right," Marcus said, his voice low and determined. "She can't just get away with this." Reynolds looked at him and replied, "She won't, Marcus. Not if we play this smart, but we can't get emotional. We've got to let the evidence speak for itself." Marcus nodded, but the fire in his chest still burned. He was going to see this through no matter what. Karen wasn't going to get away, no matter how long it took. Later that same day, Marcus was back on patrol, trying to clear his mind. The investigation, the media attention, and Karen's outspokenness were all too much for him, and he needed a break. Being out on the streets helped him refocus, as he drove through the city with the familiar hum of the police radio playing in the background. He passed by busy neighborhoods, crowded sidewalks, and busy intersections, and for a moment, he could almost forget about the chaos. As he turned onto a quieter street, his thoughts went back to Karen. How had things gotten this far? She had been reckless, even dangerous, and yet she was acting like the victim. It didn't make sense to him that entitled, privileged people like Karen thought they could do whatever they wanted without consequences. This wasn't a small argument, she had almost killed him. The crackling of the radio brought Marcus back to the present. He had to change his plans, because there was a minor disturbance a few blocks away. As he drove, he couldn't help but think about how things would have been different if the roles had been reversed. If he, the black cop, had been the one driving and hitting a white woman and then fleeing the scene, he would be in jail right now facing serious charges, but Karen got to go home free as a bird. It was frustrating, but he had to face the truth. By the time Marcus got to the scene of the disturbance, a small crowd had already formed, but it wasn't. A small argument broke out between two neighbors, and Marcus quickly calmed things down before things got worse. As he was packing up to leave, he caught a glimpse of a sleek silver SUV parked across the street. It wasn't the car itself that caught his eye, but the blonde driver, Karen, who was sitting there watching him. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He knew that woman. Marcus had a chill go down his spine. What was she doing here? Was she playing some kind of sick game? He pretended not to notice her and kept walking to his patrol car, but his mind was racing. Had she been following him? Was she trying to scare him? Whatever it was, Marcus knew one thing for sure: Karen wasn't done, and neither was he. As he sat in his patrol car and watched Karen's SUV pull away from the curb, she hadn't made any move to confront him, she had. He got the unsettling feeling that she wasn't just walking by chance, she was there on purpose. As Karen's car drove off down the street, Marcus's mind raced with questions about why she was here. Was she trying to rattle him and get him to react? Or was she just trying to remind him that she was there, as if to say, "I'm still here and I'm not going anywhere"? He took a deep breath and tried to calm down. He could have let her get under his skin right now, not with everything that was going on with the internal investigation. He could have let her win, not by threats or any other means. Just as he was about to start the car and drive off, his phone rang. He looked down and saw a text from his partner, Officer Davis. It was a short text, but full of urgency. "We've got a problem." Without thinking, Marcus replied, "What's going on?" A moment later, Albright responded with another story. "They're saying you used racial profiling during the stop, and they're hiring a lawyer for Karen." Racist profiling wasn't even on his mind when he pulled Karen over for breaking the law, and he punished her accordingly. But now, thanks to her husband's influence, they were twisting the story again to make it look like he had targeted her because of her race. His phone rang again. There was a press conference tomorrow, and he might want to be there. Marcus groaned. A press conference meant that this was about to go public in a much bigger way than it had before. The media would look at every detail of Karen's story and make him look like the bad guy. Karen and her husband knew exactly how to play this game of optics. He slammed his hand on the steering wheel, furious at how the situation could get so out of hand. It was Karen who had been in the wrong, Karen who had put lives in danger, but she was being made out to be the victim. Marcus knew he had to get ready for the worst, because his name was about to be dragged through the mud later that night as. Marcus was at home trying to collect his thoughts when his doorbell rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, and after a long day, he wasn't really in the mood for visitors. But the knock came again. This time it was more urgent, and when he opened it, to his surprise, it was Officer Davis. "Hey man," Davis said, stepping inside without asking. We need to talk. Marcus nodded and shut the door behind him. Yeah, I figured this whole thing was getting out of hand, Davis said. Davis looked serious and furrowed his brow. It's worse than you think. Albright is doing everything he can to make you look like a bad cop. He's talking to city officials and using Karen's claims of racial profiling to build a case against you. He wants it to look like you've done this kind of thing before. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I've never profiled anyone in my life, he said. Davis nodded. And anyone who's worked with you knows that. But Albright doesn't care about the truth. He's using this as a way to get what he wants. Protect Karen and discredit you at the same time. The more he pushes this story, the harder it will be to clear your name. What do we do? Davis asked in a firm voice. We gather evidence. He meant that they should get witness statements, body cam footage from that night, every second of it, and anything else that could show that you were doing your job and that Karen made things worse. They couldn't let Albright control the story. Marcus nodded, grateful for his partner's support. I'll need all the help I can get. Davis gave him a grim smile and said, Welcome to the world of politics, man. It's never fair, but we'll get through this. Karen's not untouchable, no matter how much money or power her husband has. The next morning, Marcus got to the station early because he hadn't slept much because he was thinking about what had happened and how Carr's presence the day before had made him feel like she was taunting him and daring him to react, but he couldn't afford to lose his cool right now. As soon as he walked in, he saw Davis standing by the break room. The two of them exchanged a silent nod, both aware of the battle that lay ahead. Are you ready for today? Davis asked in a serious tone. Marcus shrugged. As ready as I'll ever be. I don't know what to expect, but I know I have the truth on my side. That's what matters. Davis replied, Stay true to the facts. We have your back. As they went into the briefing room, Marcus saw Captain Reynolds already sitting there. He looked like he hadn't slept much either, his face lined with worry. Yes, everyone in the room was shocked when Reynolds said, We're going to be dealing with a media storm today. Albright's press conference is scheduled for noon, and they're planning to make some big accusations. We need to stay focused and let the facts speak for themselves. This department has always stood for integrity, and we won't let anyone tear that down. Hearing the captain's words made Marcus feel proud. He knew he wasn't alone in this fight, which gave him a new sense of determination. But as the hours went by, the storm grew stronger. As noon approached, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something very bad was about to happen. When the press conference finally started, Marcus watched from the sidelines, his stomach in knots. Albright stood at the podium with Karen and a powerful lawyer by her side. Cameras flashed, microphones picked up every word, and the tension in the air was palpable. Karen, with her usual smug face, stood confidently as her lawyer began to talk about a twisted version of what happened, according to them. Karen had been afraid for her life. Marcus had aggressively pursued her for no reason during the traffic stop. He clenched his fists to stay calm, but the lies were making it impossible. How could they stand there and spew such nonsense without caring about the truth? As the press conference went on, Marcus realized that it wasn't just about Karen anymore. It was a battle for justice, fairness, and his own future. The tension in the room was unbearable as he watched Karen stand tall and proud. She lied at the press conference, making it look like she was the victim of a situation she had completely caused. The lies hurt, but what hurt the most was knowing that she thought she could get away with it. It was frustrating, and Marcus could feel his anger building. He had done everything right, but she was twisting the story to make it look like he was at fault. But Marcus knew that no matter how much money or power Karen's husband had, the truth would come out. He just had to hold on and keep As he stood there and watched the press conference, Marcus had a feeling that Karen's lies would soon be exposed. He knew that Karen would have to deal with the consequences of her actions. Hours later, Marcus was back on patrol. The day had been long and tiring, but he knew he couldn't take his mind off the job. Still, he couldn't get rid of the unease that lingered from the press conference. Karen's smug face and the way her lawyer told the story made anyone believe she. As Marcus drove down the familiar streets of his beat, his radio went off. It was a call from Dispatch Officer Marcus. "We've got a report of a hit-and-run on Maple Avenue." The suspect fled the scene, driving a black SUV with license plate number 7XR. "Please proceed to the scene immediately." Marcus stopped for a second. The description of the vehicle and the license plate sounded too familiar. It couldn't have been Karen. He hit the lights and sirens while racing to the scene of the accident. As he ran through the streets, his heart was pounding and adrenaline was rushing through him, but he stayed focused. If Karen was involved, it was time for justice. When he got to the scene, he saw something worse than he had imagined. A man in uniform, another officer, lay motionless on the ground. The door to his patrol car had been sideswiped, and the door was hanging off its hinges. People were talking among themselves in shock, but it was what they were saying to the officers that confirmed Marcus's worst fears. It was a white woman driving a black SUV didn't stop, she just sped off. He was trying to pull her over, but she ran him over instead. One witness said Marcus's blood ran cold. It was Karen. He went up to one of the other officers on the scene and asked, "Who was the victim?" The officer turned to him with a grimace and said, "It's Officer Harris. He was trying to pull her over when she mowed him down. She didn't even slow down, she just kept going. She's on the run." Officer Harris was a friend and a good man who loved his job. Marcus was shocked by how angry he felt when he saw them lying there, bloody and lifeless. He tried to control his anger, knowing that now wasn't the time to lose it. "She's not going to get away with this," he whispered to himself. He knew what he had to do. She wasn't going to get away with it again, no matter how much she thought she could. The manhunt for Karen was on, with police officers from all over the city looking for her. Since her black SUV was in the news from the earlier press conference, it wouldn't take long for someone to spot her. But Marcus wasn't waiting for a tip-off. He had a feeling he knew exactly where Karen would go, somewhere she thought she could hide and feel untouchable. Marcus drove with laser focus toward a quiet suburban neighborhood where he knew Karen's family had a vacation home. It was out of the way and surrounded by woods, perfect for hiding if someone came after her. Marcus was trying to avoid the law when he pulled up to the house. Karen's black SUV was parked haphazardly in the driveway, and the front bumper was dented from the accident with Officer Harris. Marcus's heart was racing, but he knew he had to stay calm. He radioed in his location and called for help. Seconds later, he saw Karen through the window. She was pacing inside, looking frantic, with her phone in her hand. She must have realized that this time she couldn't undo what she had done. Not only were the consequences legal, they were also life-changing. She had hit a police officer, and now she had no choice but to give up. Just then, Marcus got out of his patrol car and cautiously approached the house. Karen sprinted out the front door, her eyes wide with fear. She wasn't going to give up. Marcus yelled, "It's over, you can't run anymore," but she didn't listen. Instead, she made a mad dash for her SUV, so stressed out that she barely noticed the car coming from behind. As she heard the tires screeching on the pavement, she didn't even have time to react before it slammed into her, knocking her off her feet and sending her crashing onto the hood of her own SUV. Marcus stood there motionless, shocked by the irony of the situation. The very car Karen had used to escape justice, the same one she had used to hit a fellow officer, was now the thing that killed her. Backup officers arrived quickly, but there was no doubt in anyone's mind that this was. Marcus stood there, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Karen had sealed her own fate, and now no amount of power, privilege, or influence could save her. She had run over a police officer and thought she could escape, but justice always caught up with the fastest runners, and in the end it was karma that caught Karen. If you liked this story, please share your thoughts and observations in the comments section below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for the next fun and interesting story. Also, to help our community grow, I'd like to know where you are watching this video and what time you are watching it. Have a nice day.